Hello, this is my stages and layers video. I don't know why I called it stages and layers. Probably just to organize my ideas and thoughts. So I don't know if that's the correct order of my thoughts, but it helps clarifies things. Anyway, let's get into it. There's this idea of the observer, but I'm pointing to something deeper. The most fundamental observer of all, the one that sees the color red, the one that witnesses a thought, then witnesses the witness of that thought, and then the witness of that witness again. The one that experiences time itself. Metaphorically, it's like an eye behind all eyes, an eyeball that sees through every other eye, a silent, neutral, almost null witness. A blank sheet behind all experience. Not the experience, but the experiencer. This understanding didn't arrive suddenly, it emerged gradually along a path. First came the realization that the universe is far more interconnected than people usually assume. Unified existence. Whether it is made of one thing, two things, or 10 doesn't really matter. Though it intuitively feels as if it is fundamentally one. Interestingly, science itself seems to move in that direction over time, reducing the number of fundamental elements. From there, the universe began to appear as silent, a quiet stage. Within this silence, a part of the universe arises that begins to experience. Call this part a human, the human. In this sense, the universe is one, and the human is the universe dreaming, the universe experiencing itself. Later came flow state training, mindfulness practice, and shadow work. Attention turned inwards. Thoughts were observed rather than inhabited. Instead of saying I am anxious, the phrasing shifted to I see that I am feeling anxious. Slowly, identity detached from thoughts and then even from sense of identity itself. What became apparent was a silent witness behind all mental activity. At first, this witness seemed to be the universe itself, the idea that every experience, whether human, animal, or otherwise, is simply the universe having experiences through different forms. One witness, many expressions. Eventually, attention arrived back at the original intuition, the eye behind all eyes, the absolute observer, the understanding of what this observer is evolving over time. But its presence remained unmistakable. For the sake of clarity and discussion, this absolute observer deserves a name, even though what it is exactly remains subtle, difficult to pin down, and profoundly real. At this point, the framework advances into what can now be called Stage 2. The transition from Stage 1 to Stage 2 isn't clear or linear. It unfolds through several intermediate realizations, gradual shifts rather than a single leap. At first, the underlying belief remained that the universe is experiencing itself, but that assumption led to a deeper question. What is experience itself? What is subjective experience? What is consciousness? This is where subjectivity became impossible to ignore. The color red, for example, is not the same thing as a photon. A photon is already an abstraction, an idea. A tree is not what it appears to be, it is the reflection of wavelengths it does not absorb. Slowly, everything began to feel less objective and more interpretive. More subjective. This raised a crucial question. Is there anything I know that is not subjective? That question opened the door to thoughts resembling dualism. One early mental image was of a physical universe filled with the spikes, human bodies, let's say, each with a separate bubble floating above it, each bubble represented as individual consciousness. Karim as a physical spike paired with a private bubble of awareness, ego, identity, subjective experience. This model evolved into another. Perhaps there is a physical world and a consciousness world intersecting, where a physical field and a conscious field overlap. A human emerges. Yet this still felt unsatisfying, too dualistic. Thinking deepened. Eventually, Carl Jung's archetypes came to mind. Emotions like anger, jealousy were no longer just internal states, they had real effects. Anger can break a table. Thoughts shape the physical world, and the physical world reshapes thoughts. The separation between inner and outer began to collapse. The boundary between what is out there and what is in here started to blur. Colors, trees, sounds, objects, the so-called physical materialistic world revealed itself as something still being witnessed, still experienced, still subjective, still consciousness. From this, an understanding emerged that closely resembles Kant's transcendental idealism. There may indeed be an objective reality, the thing in itself, the noumenon, but it is fundamentally unknowable. It exists independently of an observer, yet nothing can be said about it directly. Everything that is known, everything experienced, perceived, thought, or understood is phenomena. Phenomena are inseparable from consciousness. Over the years, the worldview shifted accordingly. The early idea, everything is one, everything is the universe, was originally framed in a materialistic sense. Later, it transformed into something deeper. Everything is one, everything is the universe, but this universe is fundamentally a subjective conscious one. A huge mind, let's say. Everything that is known is consciousness. Whether something exists beyond it, the noumena, remains logically possible. Perhaps even likely, but inaccessible. It cannot be grasped, described, or experienced. This marks stage 2. Stage 3 emerges as a synthesis of stage 1 and stage 2, a fusion between the idea of the observer and the distinction between phenomena and noumena. The starting point is simple but unavoidable. There is a witness that is not itself an experience. There is an observer that is silent. If something is being witnessed, then there must be a witness. If something is seen, something is seeing. What is seen, its phenomenal form, not the noumena, is subjective. It is experience, it is consciousness. But the one that sees is not experienced in the same way. It is not seen, it is not observed, it cannot be witnessed. The ego can be witnessed. Thoughts about the self can be witnessed. Feelings of me can be felt and examined. But in all of this, there is still experiencing happening. Tracing this process backward, witnessing the thought, then witnessing the witness of the thought, leads inevitably to something that cannot be experienced at all, an observer that does not appear as content within consciousness. At this point, two things became absolutely undeniable. First, there is experience. Second, there is something that is not an experience, yet it is experiencing the experience. There is something that cannot be witnessed, but it is witnessing everything that can be witnessed. This raises a decisive question. What prevents this observer from belonging to the noumenal world or realm? What prevents it from being evidence of the noumena itself? The conclusion that follows is striking. The only thing whose experience seems to be known from the noumenal side rather than merely inferred is the observer itself, the eye behind all eyes, the absolute witness. In this sense, the observer is not a phenomena. It is not part of the experience. It is not content. It is noumenal. This is stage 3. Okay, now it's the layers. Before going any further, let's call it A, okay? Before going any further, it helps to address logos, or language itself. While reading Anil Seth's Being You, which can be looked up, the role of confirmation bias and perception became clear. The mind doesn't merely observe reality, it actively shapes it based on beliefs, focus, and expectations. If someone is told to look for dogs in an image, dogs suddenly appear everywhere. Things that were invisible moments earlier become obvious. The same principle applies to manifestation, confidence, outcomes. What attention is directed towards begins to structure experience. In that sense, the mind participates in constructing reality. This idea can be scaled up and connected to the broader discussion of consciousness and phenomena. While walking through my village, a thought experiment emerged. If all memories, associations, and definitions related to the village were suddenly erased, yet I found myself physically there, the experience would be completely different. The feelings, thoughts, and meanings would change radically. A sense of pure novelty would replace familiarity. Pushing this further, imagine never having seen a tree before, seeing one for the first time without any concept of tree, then gradually removing more definitions, more labels, more conceptual scaffolding. What remains begins to feel like a strange openness, perhaps an emptiness. This led to a connection between language and perceived boundaries. The labels assigned to things seem to create their edges. When does a table stop being a table? How much can be removed before it is no longer qualifies? Where exactly is the boundary? These distinctions and conceptual. These distinctions are conceptual. They are ideas. One person sees a table, another who has never encountered one might see a decoration or a tool or simply something solid and flat. The same continuous reality is partitioned differently depending on interpretation and use. This naturally echoes Plato's question of ideal forms. What is the true table? What is the true tree? There are countless trees, so which one is the tree? This isn't an assertion that such an ideal form must exist, but an exploration of how categorization works at all. From this, an insight about language emerges. The deeper and richer the language, the more distinctions can be made, the more words available, the more forms can be recognized, named, and examined. Perhaps this allows experience to be explored at greater depth, though even that remains an open question. Now, for layer B. Now to the idea of the collective subconscious. Before humans existed, before human consciousness at least, there was a point in the universe where no humans were present, yet eventually humans did emerge. From this a thought arises. Even back then there must have been potentiality. The potential for human existed like back then. Whether or not it was guaranteed to actualize, the evidence of this potential is simple. Humans exist now, and conscious humans at that. Extending this logic forward, if humanity continues to evolve scientifically, cognitively, consciously, then the potential for more evolved forms of humans may already exist as well. At this point, the idea leans into science fiction, but it remains philosophically interesting. It is conceivable that future beings might experience reality in radically different forms or ways, perceiving space-time four-dimensionally, observing timelines as a whole, seeing past and future within a block universe framework. Whether this is literally possible is secondary. The point is the idea of unrealized but real potential. This brings the focus back to the collective subconscious. Within the collective subconscious exists patterns of thoughts, memes, mindsets, ways of saying and being that shape behavior and outcomes. Some of these orientations are constructive, others destructive. There are patterns that encourage growth, transcendence, life creation, and power, and others that encourage stagnation, victimhood, decay, extinction, or collapse, like nihilism, for example. Poetically speaking, one could call these orientations spirits, not in a literal supernatural sense, but as large-scale psychological and cultural forces. Love, sacrifice, domination, resentment, these are not confined to single individuals. They live across populations and across times. From an evolutionary perspective, some of these patterns may persist because they enhance survival. A way of thinking leads to a way of acting. A way of acting increases survival. The pattern propagates. In that sense, ideas themselves evolve. Seen through this lens, religious concepts, gods, demons, spirits, can be understood not as physical beings, but as immense structures of meaning that exist within the collective subconscious. They are not located in one body or one mind. They exist as distributed patterns, as potentials embedded in humanity itself. These potentials may or may not fully manifest. Some may already exist in a fourth-dimensional sense, spread across time rather than space, appearing from within time as if they were always there. Throughout history, let's say. What seems future-orientated from one perspective may appear eternal from another. This framework blends two layers of collective subconscious. One is structural, the shared symbolic and psychological pattern that exists at any given moment. The other is chronological, how these patterns unfold across history, shaping civilizations, rising and falling with time. Certain mindsets build societies, others slow them down or dismantle them. Some patterns allow civilizations to reach unprecedented levels of complexity, others pull them towards collapse. These forces are not limited to one era or one culture. They recur, mutate, and reappear across history. To be clear, this is not an argument for literal spirits, demons, or gods in a traditional or supernatural sense. The word spirit is being used as a label for something more abstract, a mode of potentiality, a large-scale mindset embedded in the collective subconscious. In this integrated sense, spirit names a real force, Not a creature, but a pattern, one that exists across minds, across time, and across possibility itself. Finally, this leads to layer C, the expansion of human evolution. Taking everything discussed as context, layers A and B, the previous two layers, language and meaning and logos, the collective subconscious, the chronological collective subconscious, and the idea of potentiality. This layer, like layer C, emerges from a very personal core motive, the search for meaning. The driving question was never abstract curiosity alone, it was the need to find meaning, especially after passing through a nihilistic atheistic phase where everything felt empty. Just atoms colliding, no right or wrong, no value, no purpose, and no purpose. In that frame, life felt fundamentally pointless. The only idea that ever offered even a faint sense of hope, almost sci-fi in nature, was this one. If humanity continues to evolve intellectually, consciously, scientifically, biologically, and if the right forces guide that evolution using spirit in the previously defined non-literal sense, then perhaps something extraordinary could emerge as a consequence. Maybe, just maybe, humanity could transcend, and maybe that transcendence includes time itself. In this poetic framework, imagine reaching a point where value and meaning are not merely discovered but created. Perhaps even the afterlife is not something that always existed, but something that is eventually brought into being. From that perspective, imagine higher dimensional beings, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, whatever the metaphor requires, looking back at the entire timeline, looking at every individual who lived, suffered, struggled, and died, not judging them morally in a simplistic way, but evaluating their impact through causality, their butterfly effect. If a person's existence contributed, even indirectly, to the trajectory that led to this transcendence, if their action aligned with the patterns, values, and spirits that made it possible, then that individual is carried forward, they evolve, they are preserved, they enter what could be called an afterlife. And those who did not, those whose existence was not contributed in that way, remain dead in the atheistic sense, nothingness, an end. Stripped of poetry and reduced to its logical core, the idea is this: if humanity evolves in a constructive direction, however good is ultimately defined, then transcendence may become possible, and through that transcendence meaning may arise retroactively. The suffering of the past might not be meaningless after all. Lives might gain value not only in their moment, but in what they made possible. Yes, this is built entirely on maybe, on speculation, on imagination, but that faint fragile maybe was the only place where hope survived, and perhaps that alone makes it worth taking seriously. Perhaps at the deepest level, building the future is the only thing that ever was. What is poetic now may one day become literal, and what feels poetic today may already be literal in a way that current consciousness cannot grasp. Just as an ant standing beside a human cannot comprehend the depth or scale of being next to it. With that being said, guys, thank you for listening. I'm very sorry for the aggressive tone and speaking in a fast way, but my editing skills and my recording capabilities are very limited, and I'm basically forced to make it this way. I have a lot of other things to say and other clarifications. I'm an existentialist. I have a positive outlook on life, so I wanted to clarify this existential position, but maybe I'll leave that for another video. And just for clarification, I am reading a script. So yeah, this might make the video sound a little bit robotic. Hopefully in the future I'll become more capable and make better videos. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Please share your thoughts and have a nice day.